Welcome to Offroad X Files, where the trail meets the unknown. I'm your host, Jimmy Toungate. This first episode, the Genesis File, will cover my background, why this podcast exists, and what I hope the future will bring to the show. So why does the podcast exist? This show was born from real experiences, both mine and others, that happened far away from cell service and sometimes in places only reachable by four-wheel drive. While exploring remote trails and camping in the wilderness, I've heard strange knocks, seen and experienced Sasquatch. I've spoken with and heard the stories of folks who've had terrifying run-ins with things not found in the guidebooks. This podcast is a way to document those moments and give others a place to share their stories without judgment. I've personally found that by talking about your experiences, you can help process what occurred to you. What can you expect from the show? Well, each episode will dive into encounters that happen while off-roading, overlanding, or dispersed camping. You'll hear from people who've had face-to-face encounters with cryptids, been paced by something in the forest, or witnessed things in the sky no drone or aircraft can explain. We'll explore the patterns, the places, conditions, and circumstances where the unknown seems to show up. From cryptids to UFOs, even strange sounds in the dead of night, we'll cover it all, and we'll go where the stories lead. When possible, we'll meet witnesses in person to conduct interviews, visit the site of their encounter to document it, and hope that it'll require four-wheel drive to get there. Why does this perspective matter? These aren't just campfire stories. These encounters happen during outdoor adventures to real people. It's important to document every encounter to continue building catalogs of evidence. Who knows, your encounter could hold the key to a breakthrough in the field of cryptozoology. Who am I? I'm an American explorer who's lived a life full of twists, trails, and transformation. I love coffee, cameras, and cryptids. Originally, I'm from Central Texas, but I moved to Washington State in 2003. I was driven by a desire to rebuild my life and chase adventure, which led me to commercial fishing in Alaska. Over the years, I've worn a lot of different hats. I've been a professional cowboy, radio station DJ. For over a decade, I've been fighting online fraud at the world's leading cloud service provider, and for the last 5 years, I've been a senior risk manager with that company. But when I'm not combating fraud, I'm an award-winning landscape photographer, content creator, and leader of Bad Company Overland. My rig is a heavily modified 2021 Toyota 4Runner TRD Off-Road, that's a mouthful, that I've built with mapping, adventuring, and exploring off-grid in mind. I proudly represent Set Power, Morimoto Lighting, and Onyx Off-Road as a brand ambassador. Additionally, I'm an official trail guide for Onyx Off-Road. This mix of tech, travel, and the unexplained is what's going to power Offroad X Files, and I'm excited to share the journey with you. How did I get here? It all kind of started during the time of COVID and the pandemic. So I'd always been kind of an overweight guy. The best shape I'd ever been in was when I was commercial fishing in Alaska. I was pretty lean back then. But afterwards, I kind of blew up a little bit, especially during COVID. So the whole pandemic in America started about 1.5 miles from where I live. And it was even closer to where my wife works at. So I remember when people in that nursing home started to pass away pretty rapidly. And then the fire station that's next door to where we live, all the first responders got quarantined. I'm a type 2 diabetic and was considered high risk. And I didn't want to die. So I stayed indoors for about 8 months and kind of continued to eat my feelings, so forth, and blew up to about 350 pounds. And it had gotten so bad, I could barely walk down the hallway where we lived to the bedroom without losing my breath. And my wife, I guess, was pretty terrified that I was just going to kill over and die at any moment. So one day she said, "Jimmy, have you ever thought about, you really need to do something about this. And have you ever heard of Noom?" And I said I had, and I would look into it, and I did. And I ended up joining Noom. and went through the whole program. I went through the whole program 2 different times. Where it was different from what I'd experienced with weight loss before was it dealt with the psychology of eating, which is something that I needed. And very quickly, or very early in the program, one of the things I learned was about habit bundling, and to pair something that you want to do with something that you don't enjoy doing. And I never have really enjoyed exercise per se. So, but I had always wanted to get into photography, and I'd been told that I had a natural eye for it. So I decided to pair landscape photography with hiking, because I could hike out to places to take the pictures that I wanted to take. And so that was kind of the genesis of how I went down this path. So out hiking, didn't really have any experiences that stick out other than kind of one experience hiking down a trail on a solo hike in the Issaquah Alps. I had kind of a weird feeling that I was being watched, but I thought, maybe somebody was nearby that I didn't see, or like you're always being watched in the forest. And it didn't last for very long, but did kind of pick up my pace there for a little bit, and reasonably it could have been just I got the heebie-jeebies. But I hiked extensively for about 3 years. Did a lot of hiking with my wife and my daughter all over Washington State, and then kind of started having problems with my feet and knees, specifically like neuropathy got pretty bad, and I'm still dealing with that. So I kind of transitioned from hiking to overlanding or off-roading, because I still wanted to get out to those places to take the pictures that I could no longer hike to. And I thought, what a better way to do that. And I'd been recently promoted at work. My salary significantly increased to where I was able to afford my dream vehicle, which was a 4-wheel drive. And that happened to be a Toyota 4Runner. So I got really into off-roading, which kind of led me to my first experience. I was out with a group out near Mount Baker, Washington, Baker Lake specifically. And we'd been out off-roading all day long. And at the end of the day, we'd planned on camping kind of early evening, late afternoon. We got to our campsite and set everything up. I just purchased a rooftop tent that sits on top of my 4Runner. It was a pretty big one, a lot of effort to set up. And it also had an annex that zipped into the bottom, and the ladder to climb up into the tent was inside the annex. I was really excited to use it. And so got it all set up, got the annex all set up, zipped in and everything. We had a great evening, socializing, cooking food, hanging out around the campfire, had a couple beers, went to bed fairly early, around 10:30. So there were about, I think, 8 of us total, and 8 different vehicles spread out around in a circle, but kind of well away from each other, so nobody was like right next to anybody else. Everything was pretty normal. Went to bed about 10:30, but then I was awakened right at, I believe it was 12:32. I looked at my watch, and I heard something that at first I wasn't sure what it was, but it was loud enough that it woke me up. And so I'm kind of laying there listening intently, and what I heard was, if you can use your imagination for a moment, if you've ever been in a vehicle parked on gravel and you turn the wheel and you hear the sound that the tires make on top of the gravel, that kind of crunch, heavy crunch sound, that's exactly what I heard. But it sounded bipedal, and it was moving very methodically from the direction I was sleeping in. It started around where my feet would be on the right side of the vehicle, which would be the driver's side, and it slowly walked around. I could hear each step that it took, At that time, I had a dash cam up in the front of my 4Runner that had motion detection, and right around that time, that went off, and it recorded video, but it was so dark you couldn't see anything. It also, since it was inside, didn't do a very good job of picking up the sound. But this, I really believe it was a Sasquatch because of everything that happened. But as it kind of walked around my vehicle, I was sitting up and listening very intently, and I could hear every step, and I also kind of felt it in my chest, which started to tighten up. I was getting very anxious, getting scared because I wasn't sure exactly what was going on or who was out there. I didn't have any weapons in the tent with me, not even a knife or anything, and it was so dark you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. So I'm sitting up listening. It makes it around to the passenger side. And at this point, I decided to move towards where the entrance of the rooftop tent is that transitions to the ladder to go into the annex. And so I'm up near the entrance, and I'm trying to look out because there's mesh windows, but it's so dark you still can't see anything. But I can still hear it. And I hear it walk up to the annex, and what I believed happened based on the sounds is whatever this was grasped the fabric of the annex and kind of stretched it, and it kind of made that stretchy sound that kind of fabric makes, and I heard the zipper jiggle. And I think at that point I must have made a sound, and maybe I gasped and took a breath finally. And then I heard it move away. So I never got to see it, but I definitely heard it. And based on the sound, I still wasn't sure exactly what was going on. So at some point I was able to get back to sleep, and I woke up with the sunlight coming up. And I know that because I could hear some of the other people that I was camping with were out talking. I looked out the window, I unzipped it and looked out the window, and it was getting to be daylight. So I got dressed, climbed down the annex, got dressed, quickly went outside and started talking to the people that were already awake and asking anybody if anybody had been around my rig while I was during the night around 12:30. I eventually was able to talk to everybody. Everybody said that they hadn't been around my rig. They hadn't even heard anything. And I didn't really tell them, like what was going on. But I went back over to my rig, and I'm looking around trying to see, like, can I see anything? Can I see any footprints? But because it was on gravel, couldn't see anything there. I checked the surrounding area, but didn't see anything that looked out of place or unusual until I got over to the driver's side of my rig. And on the driver's side, so the rooftop tent folds out onto the passenger side of my vehicle. On the driver's side, I had an awning, an 8x8 awning that sits on two legs at the end, and it had a camp organizer hanging on the front of the awning. And in the bottom of that organizer, I had tent stakes to weight it down, so if it was windy or anything, it wouldn't blow around. And then you could put, various tools and things like toilet paper, trash bags, things like that. I didn't have a whole lot of stuff in there, but I definitely had the tent stakes and a few things. But I didn't see that. And so I'm trying to figure out, okay, well, where did it go? And I thought maybe somebody came into camp and had stolen the organizer because I didn't see it there. So at some point, I make my way back over to where everybody's, gathered up around the fire pit. And I'm standing over there, and I happen to look back over towards where my rig is, and I can see the organizer isn't gone. It's there, but it's laying on top of the awning, which is about 8 feet up in the air, and it's completely stretched out. So scratch my head, and I walk back over there, and it's high enough that I can't reach it because I'm only about 5'6". So I get the step stool that I use to reach things that are higher than I am, and climb up on top of it and pull the camp organizer down. And then I proceed to try to throw it back up there to recreate it like if it was the wind or something. And I never could get it to lay back up there the way that I'd found it. It would only go like 1.5 feet, maybe 2 feet in. It would be crumpled up because of the weight of the tent stakes and things. So I wasn't able to recreate that in a way that made logical sense to me. And after, I'm not sure at what point that I realized, hey, I think this was a Sasquatch that did this, and I think it was curious and focused on my rig because it had a rooftop tent and an annex, and maybe it had never seen anything like that. It didn't bother anybody else. Recently, I reached out to one of the folks that I was camped with and talked to them to see, did they recall anything? Did they hear anything? And they said that, and they were the closest ones to me. They didn't hear anything at all that night. So it was just me that experienced it. After that experience, I continued to off-road and overland. It didn't really dampen any of that, but I did have some trouble falling asleep for a while outdoors. I think it's just kind of that unknown factor that, there could be something out there lurking around. It had opportunity to hurt me if it had wanted to, so I'm not sure if I was exactly afraid anymore because of that, but more just like, hey, there's something really big out there that I couldn't see, that had done something that, really it terrified me. So I started watching Sasquatch shows, Bigfoot shows, YouTube videos and things, trying to learn more about the subject. And then back November 10th of 2024, I was coming back from a solo camping trip in eastern Washington. I was coming back over Snoqualmie Pass on I-90 headed west towards Seattle. And after you come down the pass, the first town that you come to is North Bend. And before you get to North Bend, you cross over the South Fork of the Snoqualmie River. I always look to see what level the river's at. Is there anything weird there? Tree fall, anything like that, stuff that's washed down, what the rocks look like, etc. So, and traffic was really heavy that day, so I was hanging out in the right lane. It was around 1 o'clock, maybe 1:15 in the afternoon on a Sunday, and I was traveling about 70 miles an hour, right lane, I-90, and I look over at the river as we come around the bend, and I saw something standing there that I never would have expected to see, and that was a Sasquatch. I could not believe that it was standing there in broad daylight, and I could see it on the backside from head to hill. It was standing facing away from me on the river rock. During that time of year, the river isn't really flowing very heavily because all the snow and glacier that's going to melt has already done so to feed those rivers. So it was pretty low at the time, but it was standing there looking towards the northeast. It was over 8 feet tall, kind of a cinnamon color, so very dark brown with red highlights that made it look kind of like cinnamon. It didn't have a super conical head. It was a very large head. Really the most shocking thing to me was the size of its shoulders. The shoulders were about, I would guess 4.5 feet wide, just huge. Very long arms that hung down. The hands were around the knees, so a lot longer than humans would be, covered in hair. The waist wasn't tapered, but it had definitely a beefy build, huge arms, huge legs. Looks like it could very easily toss trees around if it wanted to. But it was just standing there, and kind of the first thing that went through my mind is oh my God, there's a Sasquatch standing here in broad daylight, and I've seen it. and my mind is trying to come to grips with that because, that's the last place I would have expected to see it. So this whole sighting was very quick. Once again, I'm driving down the highway, maybe only 2-3 seconds at the most, but I picked up quite a bit of detail in that period of time, and thinking back on it and what I saw, I've spent probably hours thinking about this. Things that really stood out were first the size, how tall it was, how big it was, covered completely in hair. I could see the hair hanging off of its arms. The hair was probably 4 to 6 inches long. It wasn't matted like I thought it would be, which was kind of surprising. It looked more well kept. I don't think that Sasquatches have combs or brushes to comb their hair, so I'm not sure how that happened. I've heard of that before, that they aren't always all matted, but maybe it had been swimming in the river. Maybe that could be an explanation. Can't figure that part out. Still not sure why it was standing there in broad daylight, but I know that it was, and I know that I saw it. So kind of following up on that, several months ago, I was on a podcast as a guest and was talking about this sighting, and somebody reached out to me afterwards by email and said, "Hey, Jimmy, I'm a hunter, and I'd been over in eastern Washington, and coming back down the pass, same place, I saw a Sasquatch standing in the river," and they sent me a screenshot of Google Maps, and folks is standing in the same place. And then most recently, I was on a Flash of Beauty on their YouTube channel, talking about my experiences, and somebody commented there on the channel under the episode that I was in that they had also seen one in that same location. So myself and 2 others have seen a Sasquatch kind of in that same exact place. The hunter that contacted me, his sighting was in October, and based on the date, it was about 3 weeks prior to where I saw mine. So this really leads me to believe that they use the South Fork of the Snoqualmie to maybe come back and forth through the mountains. So I had my experience back in June of 2023, and then my sighting in November of 2024. And once I had my sighting and I transitioned from being a believer to being a knower, I really got the itch to try to figure this out. And so going beyond watching YouTube documentaries and things like that, I decided to start going to conferences. So the first conference that I went to was the Sasquatch Summit in Ocean Shores, Washington at the Quinault Casino. I went to that, really enjoyed it, went with my buddy Austin, and we hung out there for a couple days, listening to all the speakers, met some of the folks from the Olympic Project, got to see a lot of really great speakers, listened to a lot of evidence, and I followed that up with attending Squatch Fest in Kelso, Washington in January of this year, so 2025. And it was there at Squatch Fest that I met Craig Yanni, the host, and spent quite a bit of time talking to him, and found out that we had a lot of stuff in common. We also live pretty close to each other, about 20 minutes away. And Craig invited me to become a member of the Pacific Northwest Sasquatch Research Group. And then as we talked more, he asked me to be his research partner, and began going out to his research area, which is north of Darrington, to do some kind of boots on the ground research as much as I could anyway. A lot of drone flying, driving up and down the roads, camping a lot, conducting field investigations. Have spent a lot of time mapping that valley, learning all the trails that go in and out of there, trying to find encounters that have happened there, talking with some new friends that I have, the Browns, and they had mentioned that they'd been at some kind of event, and Washington Fish and Wildlife was there, and they asked them, like, hey, where do you get the most reports from? And there's a campground in the heart of our research area is the location where they get the most reports. So we're thinking, definitely there's some stuff going on, and Craig has found footprints. He's potentially has drone footage of a Sasquatch. We can't say definitively, but it certainly looks like it could be. I've also, like I said, spent time out there camping. A couple months ago, my buddy Austin and I went out and camped, dispersed camped in that area. And we're kind of hanging out, had a couple beers, nothing really happened. As far as, there wasn't any real activity that stood out other than after it got dark, I was sitting maybe about 5 feet from the tree line, and I kept hearing something to my right that sounded like voices in the distance, but it was just kind of outside your edge of hearing where you could understand it. It sounded like there was definitely some kind of conversation going on, but I couldn't quite make it out. And Austin looked over and he was like, what's going on over there? And I'm like, I think I keep hearing voices. But really, I kind of chalked it up to, I don't know what the term is for when this happens with audio, but visually there's something called pareidolia, where you'll look at something, and I think a lot of these blob squatches is exactly what this is pareidolia. You look at a picture or you look at something, and your mind tries to make sense of it. And when it tries to make sense of it, you believe you know what you're looking at. Well, the same thing can happen with audio. You can hear something and think that you know what it is, but really it's something different. And so where this kind of ties together is I've heard that if you're close to a river or a babbling brook, that it can create sound that is reminiscent of human voice, but it's kind of outside the edge of your hearing. So I just kind of chalked it up to being that. Later that night, so Austin had his Toyota Tacoma there. I had my 4Runner. We both have rooftop tents. We're parked nose to tail, a little ways apart, and we both go to bed about 10:30 at night. So get everything ready. I took an audio recorder up into the tent with me to record, and that was kind of a rookie mistake because it picked up a lot of other stuff that I didn't intend it to, like the fact that I have to wear a CPAP when I sleep, and so it kind of sounds like Darth Vader up in the tent a little bit, and you'll hear that. But about 35 minutes after we went to bed, and I go to sleep really quickly, something occurred. So I didn't know it, except for I did hear something that woke me up at some point, and it wasn't too long after I went to bed, so I kind of recall it. It woke me up, and it was very loud, but I didn't know what it was, and I listened, and it didn't happen again. So after a short period of time, I went back to sleep. I thought, there's no threat here. Everything's okay, so I went back to sleep. It wasn't until I got home the next day and took the audio recorder, and it had like 9.5 hours of audio recorded. A lot of that was me breathing, and I'm sitting here at home listening to it with headphones, and I hear something, and I'm like, holy crap. And so I call my wife, and she comes in. I put the headphones on her. I'm like, honey, listen to this. And she was like, that's crazy. What is that? And I said, I think it's a tree knock. So what you'll hear on the audio, and it's about over the span of 1 minute and 11 seconds. So I'm going to play the first part, and then I'm going to kind of fast forward to where you hear the rest of it. But what I heard is a tree knock in the distance, and then it kind of progressively gets closer until the sound that woke me up. So here is that audio. So that was the first tree knock. Now I'm going to speed it up a little bit and get to the next part here. You hear another one. So it was that last one that woke me up. Now, that kind of has a metallic resonance to it. So where we're camped, there's no other place to camp within a mile of there or more. There are 2 state campgrounds in the area, but they're both 2 miles or more away. And one is more like 4 or 5 miles away. So I was trying to figure out as I'm listening to this, how can I explain this sound? Because it kind of has a metallic quality to it. So my wife asked me to play the audio for her again. And she's like, Jimmy, did you look at your rig and see, like, is there anything wrong with it? And I was like, yeah, but not really too close. So we go downstairs and we do a walk around, and we found a new dent on the passenger side that could have been a rock. So I know that it wasn't there the week before. And it's about the size that a rock would be. So possible explanation for that sound is if someone or something threw a rock at my rig. And then that's the sound that woke me up. So I did send this audio, all of it, to David Ellis with the Olympic Project. He's a pretty well-known guy that specializes in audio. He can pick out sounds that are made, and ask him, excuse all the different, extraneous noises, everything. And some of the feedback he gave me was, hey, Jimmy, please don't sleep with a recorder in your tent again. So lesson learned there. I now deploy it in the tree line well away from my rig, so hopefully it doesn't pick up those kinds of extraneous noises. But he said that, it definitely picked up some percussive sounds, and that he thought it was pretty interesting. So I appreciate David taking the time to listen to it and give me some really good feedback. So I know that was kind of a lot to cover, but I thought it was important because this show is born from all of those experiences. Okay, let's talk about what's coming up on the show. Upcoming episodes will include some of my recent adventures into the Blue Mountains to visit the Paul Freeman site, where in 1994 he filmed multiple Sasquatches. We'll look into the Klickitat ape cat of south central Washington and the Round Rock, Texas hairy man legend, and hopefully find an answer to the question of whether it's a legend or maybe something more. If any of this resonates with you, or if you've experienced something unexplained while out on the trail or deep in the backcountry, we'd love to hear from you. Send your story to jimmy@offroadxfiles.com, and you might be featured on a future episode. Currently, we're only on Spotify, but I'll be looking to expand onto other platforms soon. Please follow and subscribe here on Spotify. You can also find us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok at offroad.x.files. Really want to thank you for joining me on this first ride into the unknown. Until next time, keep your headlights on and your dash cam running.